most people, when they start thinking about owning a business, eventually land on the same idea, this thought at least crosses their mind. Why would I start a business from scratch when I can just buy something that's already working? And honestly, it's not a crazy question at all. Cash flow on day one sounds a lot better than grinding through a startup phase. So it's understandable that this is a question that a lot of people ask. But here's what most people don't think about. And this is the thing that changes the conversation in a lot of cases, in my experience. When you buy a profitable business, you're buying high, right? You're the person on the other side of the trade paying a premium for something that someone else built. And if your goal is to eventually sell, you need to ask yourself, where does the upside come from? So that's what we're going to be getting into today on this episode of Franchise Unfiltered. Welcome to Franchise Unfiltered. I'm your host, Wes Barefoot. I'm a franchise consultant. I'm a franchise owner, and I'm your no BS guide through the world of franchise ownership. This show exists to give you the real picture, the good, the bad, the in-between, even the ugly, so you can make a decision that actually fits your life. So let's drop into it. So I want to set the table here a little bit in today's episode. This is a solo episode if you haven't noticed, and I want to tackle a comparison that I hear in a lot of conversations, especially here lately. So I started working with a nonprofit organization that does great work. They work with a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs. It's, mostly retired business owners, retired, executives, have a lot of real world business experience, and they are helping primarily aspiring business owners try to figure out how they can make that transition into business ownership. And so I've been working with them to put together some resources on franchising, and because it's not something that any of the folks at this organization have a lot of experience in themselves. So in doing that, I'm having more and more conversations with people that, originally came into it saying, hey, I want to own my own business. I'm tired of working for the man. But in order to do that, I need to go and buy an existing business. And usually the primary motivation for that is they want cash flow. They want income from the business right away. But anyways, I thought it would be worth putting a short episode together. And what I'm hearing from people is they're like, Wes, I get the whole franchising thing, I guess, a little bit, but my primary interest is buying an existing business, something that already has revenue, something that has employees in place. Why wouldn't I just do that? And the answer is, well, maybe it does make sense to do that. It's a totally valid question and instinct that makes sense at surface level, but I want to give you a framework for thinking about that most people never really look at it through. Not because it's a secret or it's complicated, but because no one ever reframes the question correctly. So here is the reframe. Think about it like the stock market. In the stock market, the basic goal is to buy low, sell high. Simple. Everyone knows this. You don't have to be an economist, right? But when people look at business acquisition, they kind of flip that logic without even realizing it a lot of times, I think. If you're buying a profitable business, one that's got solid revenue, a customer base, probably a team, some key employees, you're likely buying it at a multiple of earnings. Usually it's a multiple of EBITDA. So that's essentially the profitability of the business before certain costs are factored in. And what does that multiple look like? Well, depending on the industry, the size of the business, how clean the financials are, you might be paying anywhere from 3x to 6x annual earnings. And I've certainly seen it higher than that. That means if the business is generating, say, $300,000 in profit a year, you could be writing a check for somewhere between $900,000 to $1.8 million or potentially higher. So I'm not saying that's wrong, right? That's just how acquisitions work. So there's this thing that I think not enough people are saying out loud, but that is that you just bought high, right? So if you're in the stock market, that's not necessarily the smartest strategy, right? To buy high. Because what if you get stuck with the dip? So the seller, right, the person that started the business, they bought low, right? Or they in some cases might have literally bootstrapped the business in the beginning, built it with very little to no money invested. um, Not always the case, but the point is they bought in low, right? They took a lot of risk, but they bought in low. Now they've built it into a profitable business and they're selling high. So that's a great scenario for them. They're taking their chips off the table at the top of the market, so to speak. So where does that leave you though? If you've just bought this profitable business, paid a premium for it, paid a multiple of earnings, where does that leave you? And there's not like one specific answer to that question. I think in a lot of cases, it could leave you in a great spot, right? You have a profitable business, you have revenue coming through, you have cash flow. I mean, you likely have some income. You certainly need to make sure that you understand what your debt service payments are going to look like, assuming you're leveraging some sort of debt to acquire the business. I've certainly seen people, look at the cash flow of a business, think that, they're going to be making 10, 20 grand a month right out of the gate. And they didn't appropriately account for the debt service payments that they were going to have. And they still actually ended up losing a little bit of money every month in the beginning. This is a hard thing to predict, but a lot of times business owners, they're looking at their industry, they're looking at the market, they're looking at, certain things coming down the pipe, and they're trying to sell at the highest point possible, right? Does that owner know something that you don't know? And do they feel like their business is at a point where it really can't get any better? So, there's one thing that is, for certain in my mind. If I'm looking at acquiring a business, I want to very clearly understand what are the levers that I can come in and pull on as the business owner, where I'm very confident that I can take this business to the next level. I can increase revenue. Is there room to optimize, run things more efficiently, increase margins? If I don't see a pretty clear blueprint to how I can grow the business from where it is currently, I'm not interested in buying the business and just letting it ride the way that it has been. Because chances are, if there's not room for growth, it's not going to stay flat forever. It's likely going to go the opposite direction. Right. So naturally, with me being in franchising, a lot of these conversations I'm having are kind of weighing the pros and cons of um, buying an existing business and starting a franchise. And I want to clarify that I'm not opposed to acquiring businesses. I think in a lot of cases it's a good option. I just think that there's often just kind of a misconception of what is actually happening when you buy an existing business. I also think, and I'll get into this a little more later, but I also think a lot of people drastically underestimate some of the challenges that come with acquiring an existing business. Right. And I also would point out that people buy and sell franchise businesses all the time. Right. So people can go out and acquire an existing franchise business. If you start a franchise and build it into a profitable business, you will have the ability to sell that business down the road at some point if that's what you decide you want to do. So now let's kind of look at franchising through that same lens of how you would typically look at the stock market. Goal is to buy low, sell high, right? So when you invest in a franchise, and what I mean is you are a new franchisee and you are bringing that franchise to your market, or you are opening a new location of an existing franchise business model and starting your location from the ground up, is what I'm referring to here. So um, you're coming you're coming in at ground floor. Basically, you have some startup costs, right? You pay the franchise fee depending on the type of business. You have your startup expenses. If it's a brick and mortar concept, you have your build out cost. Any franchisor is going to set an expectation for a minimal amount of working capital that they want to see a new franchisee has on hand once they begin operating the business. um, so there are expenses, obviously, and those expenses vary quite a bit depending on the type of franchise that you're looking at. But you're not paying any sort of a premium or a multiple based on previous historical performance of that business, right? You are, however, getting a proven system, a playbook, SOPs, standard operating procedures. You're getting franchisor support, right? You have this whole network of other franchise owners that are in the exact same business as you, but they are not competitors of yours. So you have them as resources that, when you're a brand new franchisee, that can be incredibly valuable to reach out and learn from these other franchise owners that, when you're brand new, they're all more experienced than you are at that point. We'll get right back to the episode in just a minute, but if you've been considering business ownership, if you're already a business owner looking to expand and you're curious about franchising, I'd love to connect with you, answer any initial questions that you have, talk about a specific franchise, and detail the exact process that I use and have taken hundreds of people through to help them understand franchise ownership, find the right franchise for them, and conduct the necessary due diligence. Click the link in the show notes if you'd like to schedule a free, no obligation strategy call. I look forward to talking with you. And now back to the episode. And I should probably preface all this by saying, not all franchises are created equally. There's a lot of crappy franchises out there that nobody should probably be investing in. So everything I'm saying here is under the assumption that this is a well-structured, well-run franchise organization with documented success, even if it's an emerging brand, documented success, at the franchisor level through the original locations and operations of that business. So your role as the franchise owner is to take all of that, right? Take that playbook, and execute and build your business in your local market. And if you successfully do that, you're stacking real equity that compounds over time. So then fast forward down the road, you've got a profitable business and you decide you're ready to sell, right? You've bought low. Now you're selling high, right? You're selling at a multiple. I've personally know people that have, sold their franchise businesses for 6 to 7 multiples. I was talking to a guy just last week that, had just gotten an LOI. He owns, I want to say 7, kind of boutique membership model franchises in the kind of the wellness space, right? He's been at it for at least 6 or 7 years. A very great business, has a couple licenses for a few locations that he hasn't even developed yet, which is part of what he's selling. That's part of the upside that the buyer sees in this transaction. And he was telling me he's expecting somewhere between a 5 and a 6 multiple on that. He's going to do very, very well for himself. So, he bought in low. Yes, he had some expenses. It wasn't free to start the business. It never is. But, now he's on the other side of 6 or 7 years of hard work and effort and building this into a profitable business. And he's in a position to sell high, right? That's typically when you see big transfers of wealth or life-changing money, is someone on the other side of selling a business. And again, none of that is to say that, it's not possible to acquire an existing business, continue to grow it, optimize it, and then turn around and sell it again. I mean, that's private equity's whole business model. So yes, it works, but you need to really know what you're looking for in terms of, am I confident that this business still has room to grow? Do I know what I need to do to grow the business and to continue to increase profits so that at some point down the road, I will also have the opportunity to sell this business at a multiple. That's that sell high moment, right? That I just kind of walked you through. I've experienced this to some extent firsthand. My wife and I, the second franchise we got into, we operated it for about 3.5 years, sold it. It wasn't a massive success for us, honestly. It was, certainly not like life-changing money where we could retire, but, we created some value. We had a profitable business and we were able to sell it. In our case, we sold it to neighboring franchisees in the same system. So it was a little bit of a different type of transaction there, which is something to keep in the back of your mind, right? If you are coming into business ownership knowing that the goal is to someday be able to sell your business, in a lot of cases, it can be easier to sell your franchise business because chances are there's other franchisees in the system that would be interested in buying you out. Whereas if you're a completely independent business, again, I'm not saying there's not a market to sell your business. There's tons of people out there looking for existing businesses to buy. But in our case, that was a really good avenue that saved a lot of time for sure. So, but for us, it was more of a lifestyle thing. We had just had our second kid. No, we just had our third kid. We weren't planning on having a third kid anywhere near as quick as we did. So we had like two kids under two at the time. There was a change that we had to make at kind of the general manager level. So, anyways, it was more of a lifestyle thing than like, hey, we feel like this business is as good as it's ever going to get, and we're going to take our chips off the table. But you know, I think that's a helpful reframe. And I'll give my buddy Dan Claps, who's been on the podcast a couple of times. He's the co-founder and CEO of Voda Cleaning and Restoration. Awesome franchise. I saw a clip of him on a podcast recently where he kind of framed the whole acquisition versus, starting a franchise question. And he kind of framed it in that lens of, if you look at it the same way you do buying a stock, the goal is to buy low, sell high. I thought that was interesting, and kind of summed it up in a way that I don't typically hear people talking about, that kind of age-old question of, do I buy a business or start a business? So, when I hear someone say, I want to buy a business that already has cash flow, I hear that. I get it. But I also want them to understand and just make sure they're really thinking through, what are they trading away, which potentially is a lot more upside down the road. And that kind of leads me nicely into the next thing I wanted to really touch on here, which is, I think a lot of people really underestimate some of the challenges that come with buying an existing business. Because I hear this hand in hand with, well, I want to acquire a business. I want cash flow from day one. It'll already be established. I'll have customers, I'll have employees, I'll have all of these things in place. And they kind of think that they're skipping the grind and the hustle of building a business. And in some ways you are, but that doesn't mean that you still don't have to come in and learn everything there is to know about that business, about your customers, about your sales process, about your marketing, about your client acquisition strategies, about the employees that you have. And look, I'm out of fingers over here. About the employees that you, inherit, right? What are the dynamics going on in the team? Who are your strongest assets? Who are potentially liabilities on your team? What are the personal things going on in their lives that could have an impact that, the previous owner has spent years and years and years just knowing and understanding all of these things. And so I think that piece of it's a little bit underestimated. You actually have a much steeper learning curve when you step into a business that is, doing 7 figures, 8 figures, 10 figures a year in revenue. I mean, even just 6 figures a year in revenue. Very, very different scenario than, starting at zero and, working your way up. In some ways, maybe you could compare it to like, being a brand new parent, raising a kid from a newborn, right? Where they can't walk, they can't talk in the beginning. So, you kind of get to ease into it, right? Versus like adopting an 8-year old where they're already running, they're already talking back to you. Like it's totally different. I'm not saying that, one is better than the other, but it's just a very different thing. And if you've never been a parent before and you jump straight into having an 8-year old and you never get to go through that newborn phase with them and before they're walking and before they're talking and all that, it's a steeper learning curve. So, one thing I would recommend to anyone that's acquiring a business is, if at all possible, make sure it is built into the purchase agreement that the previous owner, um, is contractually obligated to stay engaged for some period of time. Minimum 3 months, I would say 6 to 9 months is even better. If you're able to negotiate some sort of seller financing where there's like an earnout, where the previous owner actually doesn't get paid the full amount until they have stayed engaged and helped to make it as seamless of a transition as possible. That's like the most ideal scenario, and I have seen that happen numerous times in my own experience. But um, and I want to be fair because I said at the top, there's nothing wrong with buying an existing business. Um, there isn't. It's a legitimate strategy, and people do it all the time. But I think people tend to focus too much on the revenue and the cash flow, and they gloss over some of these real challenges that can come on with taking over an existing operation. Right? I kind of quickly ran through and listed some of these out on my fingers, but let's dive into a couple of these a little bit more because they can potentially be a huge deal. So the first one I would say is personnel. All right, I say it in almost every conversation I have with someone about business ownership. And it doesn't matter if we're talking acquisition, starting something from scratch, buying a franchise. The hardest part of business ownership is people, right? Finding and keeping good people, being a good leader, motivating them, inspiring them. Um, that's very, very challenging in business. And most of the people that I have seen fell in business or not be as successful as they hope to be, if they're really being honest with themselves, and this is myself included, right? We have not hit it out of the park in every business that we've owned. And I could very clearly point to, my leadership abilities at the time, our ability to build a high performing team that directly impacted the success that we did or did not have. So, when you buy a business, you're not just buying a P&L, you're buying essentially the people that are on that team. And those people may or may not want to work for a new owner, right? So you need to really understand, like, all right, if there's 10 people on this team in this business that I'm looking at acquiring, who of those people are like irreplaceable? Like if they walked 1 month after the transaction closed, would we be able to replace that person? Do we have someone that can step into their shoes or not? So you need to really understand, like, who are the most critical people on this team, who is replaceable, if push comes to shove, right? Because you might walk in one day and one of your best people, right? We own like home service and home improvement businesses. One of our, best installers, right? Or your top salesperson or your operations manager or your business development guy that has relationships with, three of your top 5 clients. And they bounce because they were loyal to the previous owner. They don't know you from Adam, and they're not really willing to roll the dice and stick around to see what life is going to be like under new ownership. It happens. Right. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Right. Because you don't really know until you're already holding the keys. This is this, kind of funky dynamic when you're going through due diligence, looking at buying a business, or if you're the owner of the business selling, you're not going to go and broadcast to your team, hey, I'm selling the business just so you guys know. You're not going to like parade prospective buyers in front of your team and, let everyone mingle and get to know each other. Like when we were selling our business, that kind of became a sticking point. And again, we sold to um, some people that already owned the same franchise. They were just in the territory neighboring us, so they knew the business. They had their own small team. We had more territory. We had a bigger team. We had a bigger business than what they were doing. That's a lot of what was appealing to them about the opportunity. And they wanted to talk to a couple of the key people that we had, and I was like, I'm sorry, not going to happen. Right? We're not going to broadcast to our guys that we are looking at selling the business, because who knows how they react to that. May be perfectly fine and nothing happens. They might jump ship before the transaction closes, in which case that could give the buyers reason to reconsider. So it's this kind of very gray area of like, how do you handle these situations? But normally, if you're buying the business, you're not going to get to meet the people that you're going to be inheriting on your team before the transaction closes and you actually own the business. So that's a big challenge that I don't think gets talked enough about when it comes to acquisitions. We'll get right back to the episode, but I wanted to quickly share a free resource with you. If you're curious about franchise ownership and want to learn more about how countless people, including myself, have leveraged franchising as a way to create more freedom for themselves and to take control of their livelihood, I've put together an ebook. It's called Franchise Wealth Creation, and it's the perfect starting point for anyone that's just curious to learn more about this whole franchise thing and how I've helped hundreds of other people navigate all the steps involved in understanding and researching franchising. So click the link in the show notes, fill out a short form. I'll send you the ebook. I think it's a great starting point if you're curious at all about learning more about franchising. All right, let's get back to the episode. All right, number 2 is customer and client relationship, right? Same story, different angle here. A lot of existing businesses, especially like service businesses, they're built on relationships, right? The clients don't have a contract with the company necessarily, but they have a relationship with the owner. What happens when that original owner that they have had that relationship with for so long leaves? Hopefully they're perfectly willing to give the new owner a shot. Unless the new owner comes in and screws something up, they're going to stick with you. But there's no way of knowing that for sure. Good friend of mine, college and roommate, bought an existing outdoor lighting business probably about a year ago. And this was not a franchise. It was like a husband and wife that started the business 15 years ago. The business was profitable, fair asking price. Unfortunately, the husband, from the original owners, had some serious health issues. So that was the reason that they were selling. There were clearly some things that my buddy could come in and do to grow the business, to, implement technology, make things run more efficient, improve the margins. Like there was clearly upside to be had, right? I mean, I looked at a lot of this with him. We talked about, him looking at franchises. I told him, I said, man, this seems like a great opportunity. And if you can make it happen, I think you should pursue this. But because he's in the outdoor lighting business, a lot of his clients come from referrals from like landscaping companies. And so what ended up happening 3 or 4 months in to my buddy taking over this business is that, 2 of his most consistent referral partners that were landscapers, I guess they'd kind of been dabbling with the idea of getting into outdoor lighting themselves, because it already kind of goes so closely with what they're already doing with landscaping. And they had just kind of resisted doing that out of respect and loyalty for the relationship they had had with this husband and wife that started the outdoor lighting company 15 some years ago. They didn't have any loyalty to my buddy. He didn't do anything to screw them over or drop the ball. They just never really gave them a chance. They said, okay, cool. This is our sign that we should go ahead and just start doing outdoor lighting ourselves. So, you know, as my buddy's looking at everything, these two landscaping companies, I don't remember the exact numbers. Let's say it's 20% of the company's revenue came from referrals from these two landscapers in the previous year. That just went away, right? And not only did it go away, they started competing against him, right? Now, he's fine. He's doing well. Like, he's figured it out. It was just a curveball he didn't expect. Back to my previous point about personnel, he's definitely run into some of that. He's figuring it out. None of this stuff is usually like a deal breaker, right? Where everything comes crashing down around you. It's just, I think a lot of people uh, don't anticipate some of these challenges that are going to be there when you buy an existing business. And I'm not saying these challenges aren't there when you start a business, franchise or not. They will be. It's just that you're getting into it on your own terms instead of inheriting something else that someone else built, and that you don't necessarily understand all the dynamics at play coming into it. Right. And keep in mind, if you're a business owner selling your business, like, obviously, you would hope that you are, you're dealing with someone that's honest, and they're not like misrepresenting their financial numbers or anything like that. But they don't have any real incentive to be like, look, there's these two clients of ours. They sent a lot of referrals, but there's a good chance once we're out of the picture, they might stop referring business to you and just start competing with you. Like, I don't know, most people selling a business are probably not going to come out and tell a prospective buyer about that dynamic. You are only going to be able to learn that dynamic once you own the business and you're in it. Got a little bit sidetracked there, but yeah, I mean, understanding who your clients are, how you get clients, where your revenue is coming from, like, all of that's super important when you are acquiring a business. And there's no guarantee that clients are going to stick with you when ownership changes hands, especially if it's like a very relationship driven type of business. If it's more transactional, then maybe there's not as high of a risk of that. Certainly need to make sure you have a non-compete built into your purchase agreement, so that the person you buy the business from doesn't just turn around and start competing with you immediately. But it's a challenge, right? Challenge number 3, I already touched on this a little bit. It's the learning curve. Again, I think there's just kind of this assumption that, oh, there's revenue and cash flow day one, so everything is hunky dory in my new business that I just acquired. And there's a massive learning curve. There's a massive learning curve anytime you start a business. I think I already kind of dove deep enough into this one. I won't overdo it here, but it's something to really really think about, and do everything you can to try to keep the previous owner engaged as long as possible to help make it a seamless transition, I should say. So, just, I don't know, these are things that don't get enough attention. I think there's been a lot of conversation. You got people like Cody Sanchez online. I have nothing against Cody Sanchez. She's wicked smart, obviously super successful. But I think people like her talking so much about acquiring businesses, it's kind of been romanticized a little bit. And I just want to, help people kind of look at it through more of a realistic lens. Um, and that kind of leads me to the next business, the next point here. If you're looking at buying an existing business, you have to ask the question, why is the business for sale in the first place? Right. This is a super important question. It may sound really, really obvious, but I don't think enough people dig into this like they should. Owners sell businesses for all types of reasons, right? They're ready to retire, health, burnout, partnership disputes. Sometimes they sell businesses because it's about to hit a wall, right? Or they know something is coming that maybe you don't know because you're not an industry insider. right? There's probably a lot of businesses for sale out there right now because AI is disrupting their business in a major way. And they look out at the next 2 to 3 years and they're like, I don't even know if this business can be around then. So let me see if I can sell it now, get as much for it as I possibly can and get out, right? I'm sure there have been some acquisitions that have happened over the past year or so that the person that bought the business 2, 3 years from now, unfortunately, isn't going to be in business any longer because of AI. I'll go back to my buddy with the outdoor lighting company. And I'm not saying that the people he bought the business from had any idea this was coming or could have known that this was coming, but he this would have been, I guess, like early 2025, maybe like mid 2025 when he closed on this, but it was it was literally like weeks, no more than a month when they finalized everything, all the tariffs with China and stuff came into play. Well, guess where he bought most of his lights from? And so did every other outdoor lighting company. So it's not like, it was still kind of an even playing field, but it was just one of those things. It's like, he didn't see that coming, right? And he was smart. Like he did, look into, their supply chain and where they bought their product and stuff from. But, there's no way that he could have known these tariffs were coming, right? So it's just another example, if it's the type of business where you have long-term contracts and you have a couple of these contracts about to expire, and you don't stand a good chance of renewing those contracts, or you've just lost a major client. These are all reasons that people could sell, and if you don't do the right due diligence, you get totally blindsided by something. Maybe there's some regulatory thing or industry dynamic that's just gonna erode the margins of the business. There's any number of things, but you owe it to yourself to really do everything that you possibly can to understand the real reason behind why the business is for sale. And there are plenty of legitimate good reasons, like in my buddy's case with the lighting company. Like, it was unfortunate uh in the sense that there were some serious health issues involved for these people that he bought the business from. But that's actually, in my eyes, that's a good reason. I'm not saying that it's good, but it's a good opportunity, right, when that is the reason behind why the business is for sale. Versus it's just like, hey, we've had, just record setting year after record setting year, and we're ready to take our chips off the table because we feel like there's no way we can keep up this level of growth. So again, I just want to be very clear. None of these challenges mean don't buy an existing business. They mean go in with your eyes open, understand what it is you're actually purchasing, and also understand that buying an existing business is not this magic cheat code to skip hard work, to skip um the trial and the tribulations of business ownership. In a lot of cases, you are jumping into the deep end instead of wading into it, right? Because you're stepping into this operation that's already moving so much faster than when you're starting it slow and you're starting it from the ground up. So I think that's kind of my biggest point. The revenue, the cash flow is great, but if you think buying an existing business is like this easy button and you can just essentially kind of pay your way through the hustle and the grind and the trials of business ownership, you're probably going to be disappointed in that. Yeah. And so, to kind of bring it full circle, I guess, let me contrast some of these points I just made about, the challenges of acquiring a business with starting a franchise. Right. So let's start with, I think I started with personnel before, right? So let's start with personnel, right? When you start a franchise, it is still going to be the hardest part of it, right? Finding and keeping good people, right? But when you're starting a franchise, you're building your team, you hire intentionally, And if the franchisor is good, they're going to have support and systems in place to help you find the right type of people, onboard them, train them. You're not in it by yourself. It is still up to you as the owner. The buck stops with you, but you're not completely alone, left to figure it all out on your own. You get to really set the culture, right? Versus inheriting a culture that can be a shock for sure. If you're inheriting a culture and then you kind of realize like, damn, I'm not even I'm not even a good culture fit for this business that I just bought. Um, if you hire well, if you lead well, if you inspire well, chances are your people are going to be loyal to you. Who knows if that's the case when you inherit a team? Customer relationships, right? You're building those from day one. You own them. It's not to say you won't lose customers from time to time, but you're probably not going to lose customers, for some of the reasons that I outlined earlier. You're also going to probably know, uh, if it's the type of business where you have these relationship driven customers, like it probably won't be a huge shock if one of them does leave. You'll probably have a heads up of some sort, and maybe opportunity to kind of salvage things. And yes, there's still going to be a learning curve, right? But it's kind of like I said earlier. It's like being a parent for the first time, and your kid can't walk or run away from you in the first year, right? Like it's totally different than you know stepping into parenthood with a 8 or 9 year old or a preteen or a teenager even. So 100% still a learning curve, but it's very different, and you're learning as the business grows versus stepping into something and really really having to drink from the fire hose. And also with a franchise, I said it earlier, you're in business for yourself but not by yourself, right? You've got a franchisor whose job is to help you get the business launched, help you avoid common mistakes, help you save time and money, help you avoid a lot of the trial and error. There's going to be training, there's going to be ongoing support. You've got this whole network of other franchise owners out there that are in the same business as you, but they don't look at you as a competitor because you're not a competitor of theirs. So it's like, hey, reach out for help, learn, look at who's absolutely crushing it in this business and go buddy up with them. Right. And if they're crushing it in their business, chances are they had people help them along the way, and they're going to be willing to pay it forward to you. And you'll be in a position to do the same one day. You'll be in a position to help that franchisee that's crushing it one day. So you're not in it alone when you buy a franchise. Doesn't mean there's not a learning curve. Doesn't mean it's not hard. Doesn't mean there won't be mistakes that happen. But it's very different. And I think in a lot of ways it's you're starting things off on the tone that you've set versus the tone that someone else has built and you're inheriting. So one question I was talking to a guy in Austin, Texas a couple days ago, and we were talking about a couple different franchises. Like, well, why are these franchises available in Austin if it's so good? Why is it available in Austin? The franchise is available because the franchise brand is expanding, right? They have a model that they've proven to work, right? Depending on where they're at in their evolution as a franchise brand, it may be an emerging brand, it may be a more established brand, but the business works, so they are expanding, and they've chosen to expand through franchising, right? That's why it's available. It's available because it's a good business that works, and other people have bought into it as well. It's not available because the current owners are trying to time their exit at the top, and they're not trying to get you to buy high so that they can maximize their exit. So that's a fundamentally different dynamic. And I want to be honest here too, franchising is not perfect. I say this all the times. Yes, there are fees that you're going to have if you own a franchise that you would not have if you are an independent business owner, you're going to pay a royalty. You're probably going to pay a, what they call a brand fund or a marketing contribution fund. Chances are there's going to be somewhere between 7 and 10% of your gross revenue that gets paid back to the franchisor, right? But if the franchise is set up the right way, there's going to be value exchange that offsets most of that, if not puts you in a stronger net position even after the fees. And the franchise my wife and I own, which is the first franchise that we got into, we come out net better after all the royalties and the other fees that we pay. And in our case, it's largely due to savings on cost of goods. The franchisor owns the manufacturing that builds a custom product that's only distributed through the network of franchise owners. So we're the only ones that have the ability to sell that specific product, and we get our product for roughly 20, maybe probably closer to 25% less than we would get a product that's arguably not as custom, not as high quality, and not exclusive to us if we were independent and had to figure out, where to source the materials from ourselves. So just on our cost of goods alone, after the royalties, after the marketing contribution, all of that, we're in a position to come out net better, right? That value exchange is going to look different depending on the type of franchise you're in. If you own a McDonald's, the value is largely going to be in the brand recognition, right? Everybody knows what McDonald's is when they see those big golden arches, right? It's sure as hell not in the quality of the food, right? But you put a McDonald's up just about anywhere, people are going to come because they know what to expect. My wife and I own a franchise called Shelf Genie. Chances are you've never heard of Shelf Genie. I don't particularly care about that. We didn't buy into that franchise for the brand recognition. We bought in because of the other things, largely the savings on the cost of goods. But that's not even taking into account support that we get in all these other areas of the business. So again, that value exchange is going to look different. But yes, you will have fees that you don't have as a independent business owner when you own a franchise. Now, I do see people make this mistake all the time. They're like, well, there's a technology fee. I'm like, okay, what's the technology fee for? Well, it's for a CRM. Okay. Are you telling me that if you weren't in a franchise, but you were doing the same type of business, you wouldn't have some sort of a CRM? No, yeah, I probably would. Would it be free? No. Okay. So chances are the franchise is not charging you more for the CRM than you would be paying on your own. If anything, it's kind of a wash. It comes out to the same, but a lot of times franchises are able to leverage the buying power that the entire franchise system has, right? So if you're with HubSpot or Salesforce or whatever it is, a lot of times they're able to negotiate better prices because they're essentially kind of buying in bulk. So, just don't make that mistake of saying, well, there's all these fees listed in the FDD. A lot of those are just the expenses of doing business. They might run through the franchisor in a lot of franchises because that's how they can leverage that buying power and negotiate better pricing. But, do make sure you're distinguishing, what is a fee that you have just because you're a franchisee and what is an expense that you would have in that business one way or the other. That's a very important distinction to make, I think. There's some restrictions in franchising, right? No doubt about that. I think there are definitely people out there that are too entrepreneurial to really be happy or thrive in a franchise. So that's something you need to look at, right? In our Shelf Genie business, we're not going to be able to wake up one day and be like, hey, we want to start, doing like garage flooring as part of the Shelf Genie offering. You own a Club Pilates, you're not going to be able to wake up one day and be like, hey, we're going to start running, some boxing classes in the middle of the day. So you don't get to reinvent the wheel. I think that's the appeal to a lot of people. Revolutionary business ideas are pretty few and far between. There's only but so many Steve Jobs and Elon Musk out there. No offense. And I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth restating. Not every franchise is a good business. I think that's half the battle, is just cutting through the noise. There's a lot of noise out there, and there's a lot of crappy franchises out there. And the problem is some of them are really good at marketing, and some of them are really good at putting lipstick on a pig. So that's where I come in. Call me up. I spend a lot of my time looking at franchises. I'm not perfect. I don't have a crystal ball, but um, I can help you cut through the noise, and I can certainly help point you in the right direction in terms of like what are some legitimate franchises that you should be looking at. So call me. We'll talk. Um, Anyways, I feel like this has gone so much longer than I planned for this to be like a 15-minute deal, and I'm looking at the little timer here on my thing, and we've gone for almost an hour. So if you've listened this far, thank you. Bottom line here, I guess, is to kind of pull it all together and wrap it up. This is probably how I would summarize it. There's three paths, right? When it comes to business ownership, we didn't even really talk about the first one, but that's, starting something from scratch. It's not a franchise. You're not buying an existing business. That's like tech businesses, selling stuff online, e-commerce, coaching. There's obviously a lot of ways to do that. Depending on the type of business, that's probably where you maximize your upside, but that's also probably maximum risk, right? No playbook, no support, a lot of trial and error. Then you have the buy an existing business option, right? Cash flow on day one, assuming you're buying a profitable business and there's enough cash flow to still have some left over after you cover your debt service, but you're buying high, right? And you inherit the baggage potentially. It's also a very steep learning curve that as we've talked about, a lot of people underestimate. Right. And then you have start a franchise, right? It's a proven system, built-in support. You buy low. If you execute and build a profitable business, you have the opportunity to sell high. Okay. None of these are objectively the right answer or the wrong answer. I think the right answer really depends on you. It depends on your financial situation, your risk tolerance, your goals, the amount of time and energy you want to commit, and whether you want to work in the business or own the business. I mean, there's so many things to factor in, right? But if your goal is long-term wealth building, if you want to create something that has real enterprise value, that you can eventually sell and exit, I'd challenge you to think, about which path gives you the best opportunity, right? And I would challenge you to reframe it and look at it through that lens of, where typically the goal is to buy low, sell high. Right. Now, I think for a lot of people, when they actually stop and look at it through that lens, the franchise model starts to look a little different than it did initially. And also when they realize it's more than just fast food and, hamburgers and French fries and all that garbage. I work with almost no food brands. Right. There are some amazing franchise opportunities out there. Right. So in closing, hopefully this got your wheels turning a little bit. If you're one of those, folks that's kind of been solely focused on acquiring a business, I would never encourage you to stop pursuing that route. I would say, hey, if any of this made a little bit of sense, even, it might be worth your time to take a closer look at franchising. You might be surprised. So if you're just kind of in early exploration phase and you want a structured way to evaluate whether or not franchise ownership could make sense for you in your situation, I'd love to have a conversation. All right. There's no pitch. There's no pressure. Right. What I do is just help people get clear on what it is they want to accomplish through business ownership, what the ideal business might look like for them. And then we help take a methodical approach to identifying legitimately good franchises. And I show you how to do the real research, right? And then it's up to you to, decide what makes sense for you and what doesn't. But would love to have that conversation with you if any of this resonated. And if you want to push back, right? I'm sure there's some things I overlooked. in terms of challenges with starting a franchise and benefits of acquiring a business. So feel free to drop a comment or reach out to me directly. I always like having these conversations. So with that, you can book a call with me. My calendar link will be in the show notes. And if you found value at all in this episode, please share it with someone else who's been thinking about business ownership. I think these types of conversations are more important than most people realize. All right. But with that, thank you for tuning in. I'm Wes Barefoot. This is Franchise Unfiltered, and I'll see you next time.